Yes. Okay, here we are. Welcome. I'm so happy to be able to sit down and have this conversation with you today. When I started this podcast in 2018, I started off just interviewing people that I already know, friends, family, anybody who was willing to let me record our conversation. That's where I started. And then eventually, as time progressed, I started to step outside of my comfort zone. I reached out to people that I followed on social media and was surprised when some of them said yes. Actually, most of them said yes. And then I started to reach even further. And I know that you and I connected through a very unique community. And I'm super grateful that you said yes to being a guest. So I'm going to give you the mic and I'm going to ask that you introduce yourself to the listeners by sharing your name, where you're from, and what you stand for.
Well, hello there. My name is Toccara Ross. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. Transplant of a lot of different places in the Midwest, but Chicago will always be home and have a special place in my heart. And what I stand for, a big part of what I do and how I choose to serve is through love and through taking up space and using my agency to show up in the best way possible for those around me, my community, and those I love. So anything you find me doing, if you ever see me out in the day, if you ever see me contributing in any capacity to my community, it's going to be through a large place of love and compassion, because I think that's the only way the world's going to move right now.
I hear that. It's interesting. I find that when we think about the state of the world that we're in right now, it feels like a lot of the challenges that we're coping with as a human race are because of a lack of love, a lack of compassion, a lack of like the intentional expressions of love. And I think that sometimes people assume that love is it's a vulnerable expression, but that there's weakness in love or that it's flawed in some kind of way. And instead of realizing that love is very much a necessary part of what it means to be human. And I think that when we remove expressions of love or we're not moving from a loving place, then we end up kind of where we are right now. We end up
Absolutely.
where we are right now. So tell me a little bit more about how love shows up as an expression or an action in your life.
Wow. I am like many of us. I'm relearning a lot of things, remembering a lot of things. And part of that process is peeling back a lot of layers about how I was loved, how my parents were loved. And part of my existence, being a Black person, being a woman, being a queer person, is really being intentional about how I choose to relanguage certain things about love. I am learning things about love and how I serve and how I want to serve within my community, through simply re-educating myself around what that looks like. Anything that I ever thought I knew about this process of life and love through my journey as a human, I often catch myself kind of starting over from scratch every day and just peeling back different layers about what I knew. What I knew yesterday on Thursday is definitely not what I may not necessarily know on Friday. So I'm having to be super open about this process of life. It's probably not something that, on a personal level, I've always done, but I think where I am now, the person that I am today, I'm so much more intentional about the type of layers that I pull back and the questions that I ask about existing and how I choose to love. So I'm questioning everything, every moment of my life, and that is a whole different process, and it's also extremely exhausting. But
Mhm.
I don't see any other way, because every other way I've tried it hasn't worked. So we're doing something different right now.
I think that's important. I mean, I think that if we get to a place in our lives where we're no longer curious, where we're no longer analyzing, where we're no longer asking ourselves questions, I don't even know what that point looks like, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I have a grandmother who's 95 years old and is in early stages of dementia, and she's still curious. She's still asking
Mm,
questions. She still wants to know more about herself, about her family, about, the world. And so I think that being in a place where we're still open to being inquisitive, especially about how we function,
mm-hmm.
how we move, what we've been taught, how we've been programmed, I think is an important part of really getting to that place of awakening. I think that
Mm-hmm.
what I've noticed a lot just in the world, even in the last 5 years, 3 to 5 years, that there seems to be another shift that's happening. Some people call it a paradigm shift, an energetic shift, a spiritual shift, but something is changing. And I think
Mhm.
we've reached a point where we realize that as a culture, as human beings in general, that we've compartmentalized so much that we're starting to compartmentalize ourselves
Yes.
instead of realizing that we're meant to operate as whole beings and not these like fragments of beings.
Mm.
And so, like you mentioned, even when we think about identity, we think about, I am a queer person, I am a Black person, I'm a parent as well, I am a woman, I am a
Mhm.
partner, I am a sister, and I'm a community member, and all these things that sometimes it feels like we can only live in one of them at a time, instead of
Absolutely.
recognizing like the intersectionality of what it means to be a human being encompasses all of those. And to be able to move from a place of love while in all of those parts of ourselves is so important. Without it, it feels broken. It feels fragmented. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you arrived at the place where you are now as it relates to really understanding yourself as a person?
For me, I kind of had to do that a bit earlier than most. My journey is super unique. I'm still learning how to relanguage my journey because I don't want to live in this place of trauma and having to retell these traumatic stories all the time. But
Mhm.
I do have to honor and respect the journey that has brought me to this point. And
Right.
part of that, the ugly truth of that is, I don't think I ever got to really be a kid. I was too busy taking care of my parents, too busy taking care of my siblings, too busy, all of us were taking care of each other. And I think that was a big core of my life where I was immediately put in a place of survival.
Mhm.
And I do not think that's fair to children.
Right.
And so part of that journey was, okay, I need to survive first and I can be a child when there's space. So part of my upward climb to being this whole human that I am, because I most certainly, all the things that are part of my life today, I do feel like that I'm at a place of wholeness. It's taken a lot of climbing and like through the trenches to
Yeah.
get to this place. But a lot of that came from my survival, techniques and having to really navigate through a space of um, how do I get to a place where I have my basic necessities on a daily basis? How do I get to a place where I have food, water, shelter, and I'm able to do the things that civilization wants me to do, which is go to school, which is all the upper climb of being this adult. I had to do
Right.
that really early.
Yeah.
So as I get to the place where I am now and I'm able to love in a whole space and to be able to continue to work on that process of being whole. Because once you get there, don't just stop. There's a process to that. Like, okay, I
Mhm.
feel whole, but how do I maintain that wholeness and that personal best? Because that changes from moment to moment. How do
Right.
I remain open to the changes that come with being whole and not stay stagnant? A lot of that has to do with my upward climb as
Right.
a child, as a teenager, those really big moments of life where you have to reevaluate yourself at every pivotal stage and say, hey, I can be better.
Right.
Not better to the point where you overexhaust yourself to this perfection, but
Mhm.
better in this ascension of how can I be more loving? How can I serve? How can I be this? How can I really step into my birthright, which is to have all of those whole natural experiences
Right.
as a human. You take away the blackness, take away the queerness. I wanted to get back to the essence of being human, and I never knew what that was as a kid because I never had the opportunity to necessarily um, sit in that long enough.
Right.
But as an adult, I'm able to like, okay, peel it all back. I'm not a monolith. I can really sit in the wholeness of who I am as a human, and all those other pieces will start to unravel naturally.
Mhm. I can so relate to that. I can so relate to that. I'm the oldest of 5. I have 4
Mm-hmm.
siblings under me, 3 sisters and a brother, and I also was, some would call it parentified or adultified at a very young age. I grew up in a home with 2 parents. One was an addict and the other
Mm-hmm.
was an enabler of the addict. And so there was
Mm-hmm.
a lot of attention that I didn't get, that didn't allow me or really afford me the freedom to be introspective, to look at myself, to learn myself, and was very much submerged into survival mode at a young age and remained in that mode for a very long time, well into adulthood. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there was a moment in my maybe early 20s, mid to early 20s, that lasted almost until my mid to early 30s, where I
Mm,
realized that my child self and my adult self were kind of like battling for position to
yes.
say, okay, no, we need to be an adult now. And the child part was like, but I never got to be a kid now. So there were certain
Mm,
decisions and actions and experiences that I was having as an adult person that felt like they were being dictated by a very childlike mind, you know? And so in at the child, mind wants to be playful, wants to be free, wants to be adventurous and explorative, and then the adult mind wants to be logical and grounded and say, no, we must do these things, like you said, we must have a job, we must take care of our
mm-hmm.
basic needs, we must. And the child mind was saying, but why? But why do
Mm,
we have to do that? We've had to do that for so long. When do we get to play? When do we get
yeah.
to do this? And so I
And we're told we can't do
recognize,
both.
when, why can't we do
Yeah.
both? Yes. Why does it have to be so polarized? Why do
Yeah.
we have to choose to either be childlike and playful and curious
Mm,
and adventurous, or be grounded and responsible as an adult? Like, who
mm-hmm.
decided that we can't have both?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of work that I've been doing with my therapist, shout out to my Black lady therapist, is doing a lot of inner child healing work, is really
Mm-hmm.
having conversations with that child self that says things like, I know you had to grow up fast.
Yeah.
However, I still want to know what you're interested in. What does that look like? How
Mm,
can that show up?
mm,
So I'm curious about your experiences growing up the way that you did, going into survival mode at a very young age. How are you navigating that space now? And how do you connect with your inner child?
mm. Great question. First of all, very similar stories, and it's almost like I know so many of us have these stories, and on the brighter side, it's been so empowering to see women specifically, but also men, because there's this beautiful journey of men, specifically Black men, who are just living in their joy right now, and it is so special to me. Um, I am so grateful that, again, shout out to our Black therapists, because they have really been that extra cheerleader and that person to really hold us accountable about, hey, you can do both.
Mhm.
And so part of that experience for me has just been, it's interesting because not I was leaning into it prior to the pandemic, but I really do thank the pandemic, because there was this great pause that we all had to kind of experience,
Yeah.
that had made us even dig deeper into our practices and
Right.
just slow down and really honor where we are. We have so many shifts in our life, but that was probably the more recent one for me, to kind of lean more into my practices and say, hey, who do you want to continue to be? And part of that question for me was, I want to lean more into my joy, not specifically joy in general, but the joy that I missed as a child. So I started doing a lot more things outside. I started
Hmm.
asking more questions, but not from a place of adulthood.
Right.
I really had to ask my childhood self, what do you want to do today? And I struggled, because, like most of us, we had this pause, but we were also trying to survive during the
Right.
pandemic. So my big pull to live in this joy as a child came at a really awkward time, because the adult Toccara was like, okay, we need to figure it
Bam.
out.
Like,
So I
is
leaned
we're
into
going
it.
in, what we gonna do?
What
How
we
we gonna
gonna
keep
do?
these lights on? Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the childhood me was like, okay, girl, we need to play, because you're not gonna make it.
Yes.
You're not going to
Yes.
make it. So I really had to lean into a lot of joyful pieces of my day
Hmm.
specifically, or else I would not have made it through the pandemic. I'll be completely honest.
Yeah.
On a full adult level, the
Hmm.
adult me could not have done this without saying, hey, little T, what do you need to do today? And it was simple things like I bought a bubble machine. I was outside like a little kid frolicking at the park. I was like, had my favorite candies.
Yeah.
I just did really childish things, and it felt
Hmm.
so good. And I
Yeah.
thought it had to be this grand gesture of
Mhm.
things, or it had to be this huge meditative process, and I had to read books and I had to do all this. It was something as simple as giving myself permission to do the frilly, frolicky, childish things that I never
Right.
got to do.
That you never got to do.
Yeah.
And I love when you said frolic, I thought of that. the TikTok trend of like Black men frolicking.
Yes,
When I
yes.
saw that, I was like, I absolutely love this because, like you said, how often do we even get to witness Black men being so free, being so
Yeah.
childlike, boy-like, just really tapping into that, like that joy. And I think you're right. I do believe that the pandemic and the lockdown, the quarantine that was required as a result of that, it gave us a huge opportunity. Some people saw it as an opportunity to really go inward, to go introspective, to really do some self work, some evaluation, to really
Mhm.
look at themselves in a way that they hadn't done before. And then some chose to like make sourdough bread, which was also great.
Right.
So, or to transition in and out of relationships that maybe needed to be
Mhm.
addressed, or mend
Mhm.
relationships with family members, whatever they did. I think everybody utilized the time in a way that was really unique to them. I also think that something about not having to leave the house to go to work every day created space that we didn't necessarily have before. I think like for
Mm.
a lot of folks who, especially if you live in the LA area, very few of us live where we work within a close
Mhm.
distance. A lot of us have to spend time commuting and things like that. So we got so
Mhm.
much time back. And I think
Yeah.
that with that extra
Mhm.
time, it did afford us the privilege of saying, what do I actually want to do today?
Right.
What actually feels good today, even if it's not my chores or my adult responsibilities. And I
Mhm.
like that you said that you gave yourself permission to ask the little T, what do you want to do
Yeah.
today, girl? Do you want to go play with some bubbles? Let's go play with some bubbles. Do you
Mhm.
want to go ride bikes? Do you want to go outside? Do you want to grab a jump rope or a hula hoop or whatever speaks to you? Because there's something that happens, and I'm, as a parent, I remember watching my son go through the different stages of his childhood development. And I remember
Mhm.
watching certain ages where he didn't want to play with certain toys anymore. He wasn't
Mm.
interested. He transitioned from Legos to video games, and then video games became a computer, and so on and so forth. And now that he's almost 21, I'm still seeing there's play in him still. And that makes me so excited.
Wow.
He still likes to be goofy and silly, and he
Mm.
still likes to have fun. And it's so nice to see that, because I know that that's something that we didn't all get. So I think
Mm.
it's so important that when we recognize that our inner child, our little T or little key, needs some
Mhm.
love and
Mm.
attention, that it's so important to create a space for that to happen, because I think it really adds value to our life. Youth
Absolutely.
is is vibrant. Youth
Yeah.
is powerful, and it's not necessarily about an aesthetic externally, or even being willing to redefine what it means to be childish,
Mhm.
instead of it being something that's derogatory when applied to an
It's always
adult.
been a negative connotation of being childish, and like we never wanted to do. And I don't think we talk about that enough. I was just like, I part of this experience has been introspectively like the conversation that I have with myself in regards to there's days when I chastise myself for not being productive and for being too childish and for like not staying on the grind and doing these things, and I don't want to be in that space ever. I know they're like, oh, it's normal, it's natural, but I'm like, why have we made this so natural?
Right.
It frustrates me. But then to see this new generation of young people really lean into the opposite of that, of like, I'm gonna stay a teenager, I'm gonna stay a young adult a little bit longer, because they saw how we are and how we were in that upward climb. Because we were told to go to school,
Mm-hmm.
get the degree, get the job,
Yeah.
get married, have kids, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. There's so many more options now. And I think the new, like, first of all, you having a 21-year-old, whoa, gorgeous. Come on. I was like, wait, you got a 21?
Thank you.
How is that
I drink a
possible?
lot of water and I love naps.
Okay. I was like, wait a minute. What? But they're just, you talking about how you saw the progression of your child grow, and those moments of them being able to sit in their childhood and those different spaces of how they grew. I don't necessarily think we got that experience. So to see young people sit there and own their agency and say, hell no, I'm not doing this. I'm going to stay young and enjoy that, has been really empowering. I think that's kind of helped me take more ownership going into my going into my late 30s, into my 40s of like,
Mm-hmm.
actually, I don't have to stay busy all the time. And that whole aspect of like, when we were growing up, our parents were like, that child is act your age,
At your
all these
age.
nuances that they wanted us to do. And it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
but I never had time to do that. Also, why can't I do that now? There's like, I can do both, the duality of it.
Right. Right.
It's
And
so different
also,
now.
like, what does a 10-year-old do? Like, what am I supposed to be doing that I'm not
Yeah.
doing? Like,
What
what?
language and all
Because
that.
I
First of all, what
already
does a
have
30
like
something
a
year
lot
old
of
do?
responsibilities at 10. So what else do you want
Already.
me to do? Like,
I'm like,
what
wait a
other things
minute.
do you need me to add to my to-do list? And I literally am like a Girl Scout still. So
Yeah,
like,
really. I don't
yeah.
have children now, but I am so conscious of the fact that if I'm able to bring new life into this world, I want to be so much more conscious of that these different progressions of their age, I want them to sit in those as long as they can.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get to do that. So maybe that's I know for sure that's probably why. But I
Yeah.
just want to be so intentional about that process for them. I felt like part of my life was rushed. And while I'm not angry about it anymore, I
Mhm.
do get to be different and be better. If it's not for my child, my future child, because I'm an athlete and I work with a lot of young people, I also want to make sure that I breathe life into that type of world for them as well.
Yeah.
Especially as athletes, everybody wants like, I want to go pro right away. I want to do this and this. I'm like, no, enjoy your college experience, enjoy your adulthood, like your young adulthood, like make big mistakes because you'd rather make them now than in your late 30s, 40s. You're gonna make them anyway, but like
Yeah.
do these things. Don't march into these spaces of your life trying to be so perfect and trying to do things the right way. They're not supposed to be done the right way. There's
Right.
templates, there's guides for you to do
Mhm.
things in a certain order, but it's okay if you kind of derail. I think we get so stuck in these processes like I do X, Y, Z. But sometimes you do Y before then. Sometimes you like it's okay to do them in order sometimes.
Right. Right.
We don't
And
talk about that
recognizing
enough.
that we we all, like, when they say like everyone walks to the beat of their own drum, like, that's real. We all have a rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
We all
Mm-hmm.
have a very unique frequency of vibration. We all have a very unique design, and this idea that we, have been taught that there's only like one way to get to the North Pole. It's like
Mm-hmm.
there's actually like 72 different ways we can get there. And
That
we all
part.
might end up at the same place, but we all might end up someplace different. And that's okay too, because this idea that
Mm-hmm.
there was only one track for us to follow. I graduated
Yeah.
from high school in 1995. So I
Mm-hmm.
graduated at a time when there was a huge encouragement for young Black kids to go to college, the years of a
Yeah.
different world, and, all the HBCU. And it was like, yes, go pursue, become, do a thing, become a
Mm-hmm.
professional, fill in the blank, whatever it is, a doctor, a lawyer, a politician, an accountant, and
Mm-hmm.
everything like that. But then once I was completed with college, I was still young. I was
Yeah.
22 years old and was
Was
still
told
like,
you needed to do adult
I'm not
things.
ready to do those
Yeah.
grown up things. And when I tried to do those grown up things, it didn't go over very well. You
Yeah.
know what
Yeah.
I
Because you
mean?
still needed more life experience, but you were being thrusted in this world of doing adult things. But there was this gap of life that no one really was teaching us and telling us to do. It just we took a big jump. And I don't think we talk about there's another phase that we need to talk about when the world is raising us up. Yeah.
Right.
And it's even more
Exactly.
crazy now because we have social media and like
Oh my
I think
gosh.
I didn't get a cell phone until I was like a senior in high school. So it was like to have one. My niece was she had her first cell phone when she was like 8. And I was like,
Yeah.
wait, what? And she's 13 now. So it's just kind of like there's so many parts of our culture and society that is telling us to do things at a certain pace.
Hmm.
So that probes another challenge
It
for
does.
us,
It
even
does.
as the young people, of course, too, but even as adults like that
Yeah.
who are well established in our adult years are of still trying to figure it out, and within that, trying to pivot within the new ways the culture tells us we need to exist.
Yep. Exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that's where, like, when we get to those later stages, so to speak, or middle stages of adulthood, when we hear things like, oh, 40 is the new 30 or 50 is the new 40, it's like we're trying to give ourselves more time,
Yeah.
to kind of tap into those youthful elements. But I think a big part of it too is I have friends who are in their mid 40s like I am, and we're still like, girl, okay, but like, well, really, what am I really doing with my life? Like, we still
Yes.
have those moments where we go back inward and we ask ourselves, am I really operating out of a place of joy? Am I
Mm.
operating out of a place of obligation? Am I
Which is a new
outrunning
mentality because we
it?
never assess those things. Our parents never assessed those things. It was like, you got a job, you're taking care of kids, you need to stay on that path until you retire, until you put in the grave.
Yeah.
We have so many more opportunities to pivot now. Okay, I'm in my 40s, but I'm in a
Right.
job that I hate. Boom, pivot. I'm in
Pivot.
my 50s, but I'm in a job that I hate. Pivot. 6 year
Yep.
olds, I'm in a job that I hate. Pivot.
Yep.
I never even knew those were options.
No, I only knew pivot like in PE class, like on basketball,
Yeah,
like
that's
pivot.
it.
That was the only kind of pivoting.
That's it.
Didn't
You
know,
got
and
that
like you
one
said,
job, you stay in it for
you
20
stay in
years.
it forever. You stay in it until they retire you, and then you die. Like that is your life path.
Yeah.
That's all you have. And I think what's interesting about what you mentioned, social media. I think what's interesting about social media and technology in general, especially the internet, is the idea of being able to see how other people are living,
Mm,
like
yeah.
just living in other parts of the
Yeah.
world, that the way that we
That's
do things
true.
here isn't the only way things are
Because
done.
we only saw our community and what they were doing. Okay, we saw, so and so down the street that they've been doing the same job for a while. That's what I'm supposed to. But now we see people in Russia and, Europe and East Coast, West Coast. And they're like, oh, they're my age and they're doing something completely different. This is kind of cool. Maybe I should try it.
Yes. Maybe I should try it. Maybe I should explore. Like I was watching something the other day on social, and it was a woman who, there's like a lot of like, I would say like millennials, like young Black folks, even folks that are a little bit older that are like, you know what, bump that. I'm moving to New Zealand, or I'm going
Yeah.
to move
Yeah.
to Costa Rica, or I'm going to go somewhere. And
Mm,
even things like that, like the idea, like I never knew anybody in my teens or 20s who was like, yeah, when I graduate from high school or when I finish college, I'm going to go live in Australia.
yeah.
People would have thought you were nuts. You know what I
That
mean?
was me. I had that person telling me that I was not. No, God bless my sister, and I love her so much. But I remember because as an athlete, this will be my 15th year playing, and so I've been playing and living in Europe all of my 20s and
Mm-hmm.
all of my 30s. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember my sister saying, a couple people in my family, you need to get a real job.
Right.
And all I wanted to do was just travel. I was so happy to just live out of a suitcase. Not that I'm out of that place now. I'm happy to have
Anymore,
my home.
right?
But like it was so cool to pack up my bag and go to Paris. It was so cool to pack up my bag and go live in South America. And to hear that community that I grew up in, those people who had that 20-year job that
Mm-hmm.
say you need to go get a real job was so devastating. I'm so glad that I didn't listen. But
Right.
it was just like I heard it so much that I was not on that traditional path of doing things. And
Right.
had I not been the spirit the human that I am to say, screw you, I'm about to pack this bag
Right.
and live, which I know a lot of people don't. I know a lot of people who live in a small town and they never get out.
They never get
And they
out.
have this urge for that joy
Yes.
and
Yep.
wanting to do those things. I can't even imagine not creating my own road to be
Right.
able to just go explore.
Right.
And a lot of
I,
that was out of necessity,
I've
growing
just
up
said,
the way you did, and I was trying like,
yep,
we're not going to be in the hood no more. We can't do
we're
this.
gonna get.
But
Mm-hmm.
you had to find a way. But I know that's not the story for everybody.
Oh no, absolutely not. Like I think it's so interesting when I meet someone. I mean, rarely do I meet people that are from a small town, but I interviewed somebody for the podcast who's from a small town, like in the far northeast
Mm-hmm.
of the US. And I think they said there's like under 200,000 people that are in their town. It's kind of like a port town where
Wow.
you pretty much like are born there and you live there and you work there, and that's just where you are. And she
Mm-hmm.
was telling me that she was inspired by somebody that she follows on social media that travels with children, because she thought like, oh, I'm a mom, I have small children, I can't
Yes.
do that, I can't go there. But like sometimes witnessing someone else doing something that you just thought or dreamed about doing can serve as so much inspiration, and it can also just ignite something that says, okay, if they can do it, maybe it's possible for me.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
Especially
not
this
so far
idea of
fetched.
family, not
Yes.
being able to do things with your family. That's
Right.
what I've been seeing lately through friends, family, and social media.
Hmm.
We've always been told you get a family, okay, you locked in,
That's
you
it.
gotta stay. But there are these beautiful families who are just like putting the babies on the back and going to live
Yes.
overseas. It's been so inspiring to
Yeah.
see them just not give up on their dreams
Yeah.
as adults, but also want to pour into their kids in that same way. I personally didn't think it was possible. Now I'm just like, oh, I'm definitely traveling. These kids are coming with me.
Oh, for sure. It's very possible. Well, and when we think about what it means to be an adult, You know, when we think about what it means to be a human, but when we think about what it means to be an adult human, there's so many restrictions and expectations and boundaries that we've placed on ourselves, that while they came from, you know, a cultural traditional methods and practices that made sense at the time, it would be kind of dumb of us not to sit back and reevaluate those things, because yeah, there was a time when a woman couldn't open a bank account, let alone buy a home. You know what I mean? There was a time when Black folks couldn't own property, let alone own a town. You know what I mean? There was a time when we couldn't move about the world freely the way that we can now. So now that our perspective has been broadened so much, the picture of possibility is so much greater than it ever was, probably ever, to be honest, because there's so much access now to information that we didn't have before, that it is opening people's eyes. And I think that's another reason why we're seeing this shift, you know, this awakening where people are saying, wait a minute, so you mean to tell me that I could work from anywhere? I don't need to
from
go to this
anywhere.
office
This
every
digital
damn day?
nomad world is amazing.
Yeah.
People are so inspired to just live these prolific lives without being attached to, for example, their desk. But just, it's been so, I don't know the word, but it's been really awesome to see the ownership of our lives, and to know that we get to do these amazing things, because there's a lot of that. I always rest a lot of what I do, just the way we grew up on the backs of like my mother, because she's no longer here, so I'm doing everything my mother didn't get to do. I feel like that is how I plan to live and serve. She gets to do everything.
She gets to do all the things.
I'm shooting all the shots. I'm traveling everywhere. I'm doing all the things. Because I know there are people before us who did not get to do those things. A lot of people laid lives on the line to make sure that we had a lot of these opportunities, and these are essentially our birthright. This freedom, and then to be able to really own our agency and who we are. We would be remiss if we did not step into that. So part of my work and part of how I want to serve is to do everything they said I couldn't do.
I love that. And that's part of, my father often tells me that, you know, that we will be the ancestors who changed the lineage for those who come behind us, whether we birth children,
I believe that
we have nieces, nephews, or even people in our community. Like, they will look back for generations and say,
this generation,
I remember that ancestor who said, let's try it a different way.
Let's change it up.
Let's change it up. Let's do something different. So on that note, we're going to switch gears a little bit. And this is the part of the podcast where I like to go back to some of the questions that I sent over. Every guest gets a questionnaire, and I throw a bunch of different things on there just because, you know, I'm curious that way. And so I know that you are a pro athlete, and I want to know what sport.
Basketball. Yes, I have played basketball. Probably since I was like 12 or 13, and I'm really grateful to still be doing it. This is my last year. I'm tired.
I was going to say, are you getting close to retirement, or what is that looking like for you?
Year 15, if I'm blessed to continue to play throughout this year, will be the last.
Okay. So pro athlete in basketball. So you played overseas, you played here. Like, what? Tell me a little bit about your experience. Okay.
Yeah, my entire career up until this last year has been overseas. I got a really unique opportunity to play in a league this year that is very new of its kind. It's called Athletes Unlimited, and I play alongside WNBA players. So it's a mesh of overseas athletes, WNBA players, just prior to the WNBA season, to kind of get us all ready for the next part of our seasons and careers. So the first time in my career that I played in the States, we played on ESPN, we played on CBS Sports. So for the first time in my career, my family got to watch me play on TV locally, and to physically be in the building, because there's a lot to have family be able to come overseas and stuff like that. But to be able to be in the United States, to play with a lot of my friends, to play against WNBA players, it was fantastic. So I have checked all the boxes of my career.
I love that. Grateful. I love that. So tell me a little bit about how the gifts that you offer, the things that you bring, and the communities that you serve, specifically through writing and publishing. Tell me a little bit about what that experience has been like, and what you feel you're actually getting out of bringing those kinds of experiences for others.
So I knew at a very young age that I wanted to play a sport, and I wanted to use my body and my agency to move energy for myself. And a part of that was a coping mechanism.
Okay.
Part of that was I had a lot of trauma within my body, and the only way that felt really natural to get that out was through sport. I played every sport. Basketball is what I latched onto and what I love, but a large part of that was because simply fact, like I needed to survive, and I needed to be out of the home that I was in. I knew at a very early age that as long as I stayed out of the house, I would be safe and I would have fun. So first and foremost, I want to honor that process because like that's what kept me safe. What changed my life. And I know that's a story that you might hear from a lot of athletes, but it physically and literally saved my life because there were times when I could not be in my home. So through that, I latched onto the sports and I fell in love with them. And as I became, I would probably say high school and college, you get to meet so many women, not necessarily within your sport, but other sports as well. And I started to really pay attention to the different stories that were being told and the different lives that were being, you know, the synergy that we got together. And I was just so like, I was one of those people who asked a lot of questions. I was like, where are you from? How did you grow up here? Da, 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 da. And I just latched onto those stories. And it also was a way for me to survive because I knew that I wasn't alone. Not that everyone had a traumatizing story, not that everyone had anything similar to mine, but I was just really excited that I was intrigued by the fact that a sport could pull all these stories together and we could find a common bond. So as I pushed that on into my pro level, you started meeting more people, and not just from this whole world, because as Americans, we live in this bubble. I was exposed to these different beautiful communities that were outside of my bubble and overseas. And I really just love the fact that these stories, one, were being shared to me because I just think I don't know what it is about me, but people want to tell me all these stories. So I never had to fight for them, that people would just tell me these beautiful parts of their life. I learned later that was a superpower for me. So I wanted to continue to curate the space of storytelling and to create a safe space within me and my presence, and allow people to be able to tell me these beautiful stories. And I would be a keeper of those. So it makes me teary-eyed because it's just what I really, really like to do.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a while for us to figure out what feels good and what our passions are. So I will never be ungrateful for, sorry.
Okay.
I'll never be ungrateful for the journey I took as an athlete because I just met so many amazing people, and I swear they changed my life.
Yeah.
I talk about it. It's really fresh because I know I'm retiring, so it's like even more fresh, and there's a grieving process to that. And I want to make sure that I'm a keeper of those stories in a different way when I leave, when I'm no longer playing at a high level. So part of the work that I do as a storyteller, I want to be a keeper of athlete stories because there's this unique, fight that athletes have. And I know there's tons of stories of like, well, you only play a sport, you only do this. But like for a lot of us, it's saving our life. There's so many stories that are tangled up into why we chose to play our sport and how we want to leave the next generation. Because the sport is super special. And then within that, I want to also make sure that I'm a keeper and storyteller and a weaver of those stories in communities that have affected my life, which is, you know, a survivor of sexual assault, which is, you know, a survivor of domestic abuse. And these untapped communities who have these really beautiful stories that should be told, and they should be told in a safe space. And not that these stories have been, actually, I can say this, a lot of these stories aren't told authentically. And there's this mirror of like, especially with TV, that like lights, camera, action, and like it has to be this brand synopsis. And I get it. I get the production of it, but these are really sacred stories, and I want more specifically Black and Brown people to tell these stories on their own. And I want to teach them how to monetize on these stories. Okay. Because that is part of a systemic process that we are not attached to. So teaching them how to monetize and own their stories is a big part of the work that I do. And I'm learning every day how to do that in a more efficient way. But it's something that's really, really I'm passionate about because we deserve to tell our stories, and we deserve to tell them in ways that may not look like HBO, may not look like Stars. Right. They are real, gritty, nitty, but they're real and they're ours. And you see these we live in Hollywood, so we know that they, we know what they do with our stories, and any
Right.
way that we can own them and monetize off them, specifically publishing. I
Hmm.
want our people to do that, and I want them to have ownership of that. So in a small microcosm of the world, like, I just want us to be able to have a piece of that. So that is the current work that I do.
I like that. And what I'm grateful for is because of technology, because of platforms like Patreon, Mighty Networks, like because these platforms are available for creators to be able to at best own their stories,
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
fiscal benefit from their stories, to be able to have creative control over their
Yeah.
stories, I think is something that didn't exist once upon a time. It's like, everybody didn't have a video camera in their pocket the way
Yeah.
they do now. Everyone didn't have access to editing software, so to speak, the way that we do now, where we can literally pick up an iPhone and record an entire documentary, edit it, and publish it all in one place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
that what I'm grateful for is that those things are available now, so that
Mm-hmm.
we don't have to pass our stories along to someone else so that they can dissect and regurgitate them in a way that feels best for them, or
Yeah.
compromises, like you said, the authenticity of our stories. So
Right. And
I'm
at very
grateful.
best,
Yeah,
it's written.
it's
At very
written.
best, it's written and it's
Exactly.
documented. What I've
Right.
learned, where I have a whole nother story of like how I met my father's ancestry and the documentation and the road that it took to make sure there were accurate documentation of this thing.
Hmm.
At best, I want us as humans to do a better job at documenting our
Yeah.
stories and our
Yeah.
process, because I can tell you, for someone who's personally done it, and the record keeping of it all, a lot
Hmm.
of it's been falsified, and a lot of it's not true. So
Yep.
we get to do a better job of documenting our legacy for the next generation. That's so important that we do it the right way.
Agreed. No, I wholeheartedly agree. I
Yeah.
am super grateful that I have both sets of my grandparents well into adulthood, and I have one living grandparent who is 95. And when
Mm-hmm.
my other grandparents were living, they were very intentional about storytelling, about our family
Mm,
history, about their ancestry, about everything they remembered. And my grandfather on my father's side, he wrote everything. He would write
yes.
down all the lists, even just names of relatives that
Mm.
he could
That's what we're missing, the
remember,
name. We're
you
missing
know,
real names of things.
real name. I mean, girl, because Black people be
Not
making up
Auntie
names.
Patty, Auntie
Yeah.
so and so,
Yeah.
so and so.
I
We need the
had
real
somebody, it was
name.
like an uncle brother. And I was like, okay, but like, what was his actual name though?
What was
Like,
his
it's
name?
just
Where was he
like,
from? What dates?
where
Like,
was
we
he
need
from? Do we
those
know?
pieces.
Yes, we need those details, so that, like you said, so our stories can live on, so that we're not only relying on like public record, and sometimes those things are not available
Yeah.
as well, especially the further back that we go. So no, I really like that. And I like that you've taken ownership of that responsibility that's kind of been put on you, or that you've been called to
Mm-hmm.
do, to be able to maintain the integrity and the authenticity of the story, specifically, like you said, for athletes. I know that I was what I call like a play athlete. I played a bunch of sports, but never committed to one. I was a cheerleader, soccer player, softball, everything in between. Never played basketball because I'm only 5'2", but still I ran track and I did a bunch of other stuff. But I know for me, writing has and always will be one of my favorite tools of expression, of record keeping, of legacy recording. And so I really, really appreciate when someone else recognizes, like you said, the importance of being the keeper of these stories. I
Mm-hmm.
too am a person where people naturally open up, they naturally share. I'm a Cancer. For whatever reason, people want to tell me their whole life story, even if
Yes.
I'm standing in line at the grocery store. I'm like, oh, I know a lot about you. But it's cool because I know that that's because I do my best to create a safe space, and I do operate with integrity and free from judgment. And I also believe part of the reason why this podcast even exists is
Mm.
because I believe that through storytelling, that people are inspired, they're empowered, they're liberated, they're encouraged.
Absolutely.
And I think that there's so much vulnerability when it comes to sharing our stories, that if we share them in a way that we don't have ownership over, that can be traumatizing in some
Yes.
cases. And so that's where I really get excited, and I'm super grateful when people feel comfortable being able to share their stories with me. And then if I'm given agency to be able to express those stories to other people,
Mm-hmm.
that's a beautiful thing. So I like
Mm.
the work that you're doing. So another
Thank
question
you.
I have for you, you did mention that you have played basketball everywhere. And so
Yeah.
if you think of any place that you could reside in the world, I asked this question of every one of my guests, you know, if you could reside anywhere in the world, where would you live and why? And your response to the question was, you know, I haven't seen all the places that I've dreamt of, even though I've traveled to over 100 countries. So maybe of the 100 countries you traveled to, which was your favorite?
It's so hard.
Maybe give me your top three.
My top three. Um, Definitely, I loved Australia because Australia is a place for a lot of reasons. But Australia, they speak English. I can assimilate there pretty easy.
Right.
They're just a very warm culture. Economically, I feel like there's a bit more stability over there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a beautiful indigenous culture there that is amazing. And they don't do it right 100% of the time. But one thing in comparison to the USA that they are doing is they're paying beautiful respect to their indigenous community right now and righting a lot of wrongs. Like for instance, it's, going into buildings, and a lot of the times before they do special events, they give homage to the land that they're on immediately. Like that's part of formality now. To almost everything that they do is to give homage to the people in the land that they're on immediately. Nice. It's like a 10-second little blurb, but they pay respects to their indigenous community because they've done a lot of very evil things to the indigenous community there. And we get it, it's part of history, but I like the path that they are moving forward on in regards to paying respect to their indigenous community. I got to spend a year in Israel, so that would probably be my number two. And there, Israel is doing is moving away in culture that and moving into the next phase of the world in ways that not everyone may agree on. Right. But what we can agree on is that there is a beautiful history in that part of the world, in the Middle East, that regardless of the culture and the ethnicity that you are living amongst the people in Israel, they pay respects to their land. Okay. And there, if you know, for those who are, you know, are knowledgeable about religious pacts and what that is, the being in the Middle East, it's especially for Christians, and there's a special feeling there. Yeah. While I don't identify as a Christian, I can respect the history of Christianity. Right. And to be able to live in a place like Israel and be able to drive to the birthplace of Jesus and Bethlehem, being in a centralized location in Israel, and hearing about the Jewish community and their respect for Christianity as well. And just it was just so beautiful to see the mirror of cultures there. And that respect, I think if anybody could go travel anywhere in the world, they should travel to Israel. And they should experience how the cultures mesh, because it is a Jewish state, but there are lots of a beautiful Arab community that also lives amongst those people, and it's just beautiful. I don't know. I love South America as a whole. Okay. There is the Latin culture there, there's a Spanish culture there, the Black and Brown communities there are just very beautiful, and there is an indigenous space there that is still thriving, and so they're still paying homage to the world that is not new, but the young people there that are breathing life into their ancestors. It's beautiful. So definitely those three spaces around the world are amazing. And anybody, because I will say South America is super affordable. Okay. Super affordable to travel. Everyone should spend some time anywhere in South America.
Anywhere in South America. Yeah. Good to know.
Anywhere.
Okay. Yeah. Noted. So for y'all who haven't traveled anywhere, go to South America.
Yeah, there are flights literally under $300-400 round trip to literally go to the tips of South America and just spend a week there, and you will come back a changed person.
I love that. I love that. I think I agree. I think travel can definitely be transformational. No matter where you go, but obviously if you have the opportunity to be able to travel internationally, to really go outside the comfort zone of the US and really immerse yourself in the culture of other parts of the world, to just see,
because we're new.
Witness.
America's
we're
new.
Very new. We're
new.
Literally like the babies of the planet, you know, so to speak. So yeah, we're literally just figuring things out still.
Yeah, no, really.
Here. And it goes sometimes. So it shows really we don't know what the hell we're doing. So so another question I ask every guest is it what I call like a magical question. And I realized I shared this with my son the other day. I was like, I asked this on my podcast every day. And he's like, well, you're going to have to come up with a bigger number eventually, Mom. So the question I ask is, if you woke up tomorrow morning with an extra $100 million in your bank account, what is the first thing that you would do?
Wow. I'm thinking like logistically. No, I'm like, wait a minute. I'm gonna move it to another account just in case
Right. Let me switch it over just in case it was
wait a
a
minute.
bank
I ain't
error
gonna
in
ask
my
no
favor.
questions. I'm gonna just move it to another account and we'll figure it out later. But I'm gonna give thanks because I feel like anything that happens to me at this point in my world is through the ancestors, and I'm like, okay, thanks. What y'all want me to do with it? I'm gonna serve immediately. There's so many things and how I want to serve in the world, and I literally have a list, so I don't have to make it. I am going right into advocacy because I get it. Money, first and foremost, I think love shakes the world. Love moves the world. But I am not remiss to know that when you got a few coins, that's shaking the world too. So I'm going to pour it back into communities that have breathed life into me, and that's Black and Brown communities, that's queer communities, that's women. So I'm going to find a way to pour into us to give us that extra leg in the world because we deserve it and we need it. So yes, service. I'm first and foremost to that because I'm gonna be okay. I've always been super abundant. I'm not really worried about none of the optics of like where you gonna live, how you gonna eat. Right. I already been through it, so I already know. Yeah. I'm gonna go serve because I know that's the only way. Giving love and compassion back in the world through service. That's always gonna make sure that I'm okay.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. Yes, you get a car. You get a car. You get a car. You know, Oprah status. Maybe not Oprah. I don't know her. I don't know her real life, but yes, I love it. Going into service. So. This is
I don't know what happened. I don't think I can hear you anymore.
Oh, let's see. Let's see. Can you hear me now? I had a slight Wi-Fi glitch. Let's see. Let me make sure. Technical issues. Let's see. Let me double check and see if we're good. Pause for just a second. Sometimes you have technical issues. That I feel like is technology's way of remaining significant.
So, not editing. It's 2020.
It's like, hey, girl, you almost done. Hold on. So this is the part of the podcast where we start to wrap out our conversation, and I like to do a little something special. So in addition to hosting this podcast, I am also a meditation guide, and something I like to do with folks is just a little microdose of a visualization exercise with meditation. So I'm going to ask you to find a comfortable position for your body. If you'd like to close your eyes, you're welcome to do so. And maybe just take a couple of deep breaths. Let yourself get grounded and centered. And I'd like you to visualize yourself in a time machine. It can look however you'd like. And in this time machine, we're going to take a trip back in time. And we're going to go all the way back. And when you step out of the time machine, the first person you see is your 16-year-old self. What do you say?
Everything's going to be just fine.
Yeah. Everything is going to be just fine.
Just fine.
I love that. I love that. So we're going to take a deep breath and we're going to get back into our time machine. And we're going to go all the way forward. We don't know how far forward. We're going to go all the way to the end. And I want you to share, what do you want to be remembered for?
My heart, my work of service. Yeah, those two things. No one will ever duplicate my heart. I think that is my superpower. I know for a fact it came from my mother. Yeah, if anyone ever says anything about me, they're going to say, oh, she was kind. She was sweet. And she made me feel like I was on top of the world. Yeah.
I love that. I hear that. I hear that loud and clear. So the very last thing I like to do with every guest is I've been working with this deck. It's an oracle deck. I've had it since the beginning days of this podcast. And so it is exactly a deck of 52 cards, and there's little cute messages on each one. So I would just like you to select a number between 1 and 52.
41.
41. I love when people pick anything other than the number 7.
Oh.
No, just kidding. No shade. No, a lot of people pick like 7 or like
those are like the known, like
those are like the known
numbers.
magical
I'm like,
numbers. I mean,
I picked a number that was close to me and close to like my journey.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So the message on number 41 is hairball. This is an interesting one. Basketball, hairball. I think this is really clever. So let's see. So the deeper message here is hairball. It says, uh-oh, small little tangle, no big deal. Last thing you want to do is get your knickers in a knot. It will all smooth out as soon as you stop, take a big deep breath, and realize it's time to hand it off to the universe. Hand it off, move aside, and let go.
I received that. I totally received that, because the time machine, you're like, it's going to be okay. And if this question had diverted to your older self, I would have said things are still going to be okay. And so I'm in a really unique point in my life where I'm transitioning and I'm pivoting, and I'm transitioning out of a big part of my life that I've always known. So I receive all of that. Universe, you can have it. Just, I'm roll with you.
So roll with it.
I'm a roll with you. So I
exactly.
that wholeheartedly.
Yes, I'm so glad. I'm so grateful. Yeah. Well, this has been so dope. I'm so glad that we got a chance to sit down and talk to each other. Also, we're both like relatively local, so we definitely like sit down in real life and have tea or coffee or something. That we need to make that happen. I know your retirement is coming up soon, so congratulations on that. I just want to say thank you for being so vulnerable. Thank you for being so honest. This has been like a super dope conversation.
Thank you for creating the space. Please continue to create this space. Like,
I will. I definitely will. This is definitely a passion project for me. It's starting to get more of my time now because more time has been afforded, which I'm super grateful for. So if there's anything that you'd like to share, ways that people can keep in touch with you or any cool projects you have going on, I'm going to give you some space to do that, and then I'll let you go.
Thank you. Well, my name is Toccara Ross, and I'm super grateful to be here and to be able to share space with you. So thank you again. You can find me at Toccara Renee, Renee is Renee, on all of my social media platforms. That is also my website name, Toccara Renee. I am a storyteller. I am a weaver, and part of the work I get to do in the future is to share stories and to share them with the world and allow you the space to do that. So if you're interested in sharing your story and telling your story, I would love to create space for you. So thank you.
Thank you, Toccara. All right, that wraps up our conversation. So we'll be in touch very soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.